There's a moment in your life when heaven leans over and whispers your name, a moment when the angels stop and look, because someone who was tested by fire didn't burn, someone who walked through storms didn't drown, someone who was wounded but still worshipped. God sent me to tell you today, you've passed the final exam. Yes, you, the one who's been crying in the midnight hour, the one who feels forgotten, the one who's been asking, Lord, how much longer? Don't turn away. This message may be the confirmation your soul has been searching for. If you've been walking through battles you can't explain, enduring pain you can't describe, and holding on to faith when you had every reason to let go, then this is for you. You see, God doesn't always speak in thunder. He doesn't always shake the ground. Sometimes he tests you in silence. He watches what you do when no one else is looking. He watches how you react when prayers go unanswered, when doors close, when friends walk away, when nothing seems to make sense. That was the test. And the reason you didn't hear anything for so long wasn't because you were forsaken. It was because you were being examined. Heaven wasn't ignoring you. It was watching you, and you didn't even realize it, but every tear, every choice to trust, every prayer you whispered in the dark was being counted. And now God says you passed. You weren't being punished. You were being proven. The enemy thought you'd break. He planned your collapse. He sent confusion, delay, discouragement. He wanted you to believe that it was over, but God was watching the whole time. And though it felt like you were losing, heaven was recording your victory. It wasn't about how perfect you were. It was about how persistent you were. You stayed, you fought, you believed, and when the final question came, when the trial hit hardest, you didn't walk away from God. You held on. I need you to understand this. That trial was not random. That betrayal wasn't meaningless. That silence wasn't empty. It was all part of the exam. God was testing the strength of your spirit, the depth of your faith, and the root of your character. And even when you felt weak, even when you said, Lord, I don't think I can make it, you got up the next day and you tried again. That was the moment you passed. Not when you had it all together, but when you refused to let go of him. And now the results are in. Heaven has already signed the paper. The ink is dry. The decision is final. You've passed. And because you passed the test, the enemy cannot stop what's next. The gates that were closed will open. The blessings that were held back will be released. The answers you've been waiting on will come, not because you demanded them, but because you proved faithful. God never tests without a reward, and he never allows trials without purpose. This is your turning point. This is your graduation day. The season of testing is over. The chapter of delay has ended. You're walking into promotion. You're walking into favor. You're stepping into rooms that were once closed. Why? Because your faith passed every requirement. You kept believing when others gave up. You kept giving when you had nothing left. You kept praying when the heavens were silent. And now God says, well done, good and faithful servant. You didn't quit. You didn't break. You didn't betray me, and now I will reward you openly. So lift your head, wipe the tears, straighten your back. You don't need to fight for what God has already written in your favor. You don't need to beg for what has already been promised. You don't need to explain yourself to people who never saw your struggle. God saw it, and he has declared, you've passed the final exam. Now live like it, speak like it, worship like it, and walk into the next season knowing this. No one and nothing can take away what God has approved. This is your time. This is your testimony. The test is over. The blessing is here. There are seasons in your life when heaven grows quiet. Not because God has left you, not because you've been abandoned, but because you've entered a divine classroom. The teacher never speaks during the test, and when God is silent, that is often the moment your faith is being measured the most. You prayed and nothing changed. You fasted and the answer didn't come. You cried, and the skies stayed shut. People around you assumed everything was fine because you kept smiling, but they had no idea that behind that smile was a soul going through a war. You were being tested, not in public, not with applause, not with support, but in the most painful, personal, and private way, silence. God didn't speak because he was watching. He wasn't watching to judge you, but to see how deep your faith truly went. Could you still love him when the blessings weren't flowing? Could you still praise when there was no promotion? Could you still walk forward when it felt like your prayers were bouncing off the ceiling? That was the test, not of your strength, not of your performance, but of your heart. He wanted to see if you loved him for who he is or only for what he gives. The silence was never punishment. It was preparation. It was your opportunity to show God that your devotion was not dependent on circumstance. People often assume that favor looks like open doors and miracles, but in the kingdom of God, favor sometimes looks like endurance. It looks like standing when you want to sit. It looks like worshiping with tears running down your face. It looks like showing up every day with a heart that says, even if you don't answer me today, I still trust you. And that's exactly what you did. You may not have realized it, but you passed a test that many fail. When others would have cursed God, you kept calling on his name. When others would have turned to distraction, you kept turning to the Word. You didn't understand everything, but you held on. And while no one else applauded your perseverance, heaven did. God saw it. He saw the moments you wanted to give up and didn't. He saw the nights you cried yourself to sleep, but whispered, Lord, I still believe. He saw the discouragement, the confusion, the crushing disappointment. And yet you stayed in the race. It was in that silence that your spirit grew. Your roots went deeper. Your character was shaped. You weren't just surviving, you were being sanctified. The silence wasn't wasted. It was working something inside of you that comfort could never create. You were being molded for more. The silence became the soil where your next season of strength would grow. Heaven wasn't punishing you. It was proving you. And while the world saw nothing, while friends thought you were fine, and even you questioned if God had forgotten, the truth was this. You were passing a test that had eternal significance. In the classroom of life, it's not your talent, your resources, or your knowledge that determines whether you pass the final exam. It's your faith. While others were looking for results, God was looking for your response. When things didn't go your way, when prayers weren't answered on your timeline, when you were met with silence, confusion, and delay, he wasn't grading your life based on how many victories you had, but on how many times you kept believing. Your faith became the answer sheet in a test that had no clear instructions. And God, the great examiner of the soul, was checking for one thing above all. Did you trust him when everything around you told you not to? When the ground beneath you shook, when your heart was breaking, when people betrayed you and dreams seemed to die, did you still believe he was good? Did you still believe he had a plan? The world tells you that results prove success. But in the kingdom of God, your resilience in faith is the proof that you are ready. Faith doesn't just say, I believe when I see. It says, I believe even when I don't. And that is what God saw in you. He saw the moments you should have walked away, but you didn't. He saw the days your hands were trembling, but you still lifted them in prayer. He saw the pain behind your praise and the questions behind your obedience. Faith was never meant to be a feeling. It's not based on what you see with your eyes. It's built on what you know in your spirit. It's when the storm is raging and you say, I still trust you. It's when you hear no answers and still declare, God is faithful. You didn't need all the facts to follow. You didn't demand explanations before you obeyed. You walked when you didn't know where the road would lead. And that faith became louder than your fear. That faith became stronger than your weakness. God wasn't waiting to see if you could perform. He was watching to see if you would trust. You may have thought you were failing because you cried, because you questioned, because you stumbled. But you didn't quit. You didn't stop believing, and heaven counts that as a pass. You see, the final exam of life isn't won by the fastest or the strongest. It's passed by those who endure, who hold on, who continue to believe when everything tells them to let go. Your faith is what heaven sees when the results don't match the promise. Your faith is what reaches God when your prayers seem unanswered, and even when you didn't have the words, even when all you had was a whisper of hope, it was enough. That was your answer sheet. That was your submission. That was your final proof, not of perfection, but of perseverance. God looked at your faith, not your status, not your background, not your possessions, and said, "That's what I've been looking for." From the moment you said yes to God, a target was placed on your back. The enemy doesn't attack what doesn't threaten him. He doesn't waste his time on those who are already defeated. He goes after the ones marked for something greater. He watched your potential long before you saw it yourself. He saw the calling on your life, the anointing that couldn't be copied, and the quiet strength you didn't even know you carried. And so he made it his mission to break you. He couldn't stop God from choosing you, so he tried to stop you from believing it. He sent waves of discouragement, storms of confusion, and moments of crushing disappointment. He whispered lies in your ear, hoping you'd forget who you are. He used people close to you to plant seeds of doubt. He tried to convince you that your mistakes disqualified you, that your prayers were pointless, that your life would never be more than struggle and survival. But what he didn't count on was your persistence. He didn't expect you to fight back with your worship. He didn't expect you to keep showing up when everything told you to stay down. He didn't expect your heart to stay soft after betrayal, your spirit to stay open after heartbreak, your mind to stay focused after all the chaos. The enemy wanted you to break under pressure, but instead you bent and refused to snap. He wanted you to curse God and give up, but instead you lifted your hands and praised anyway. Every time he thought the last blow would take you out, you got up again. And with every rise, you sent a message to hell that no weapon formed against you would prosper. He threw loss at you. He threw delay. He threw loneliness. He brought depression to your door and disappointment to your plans. But even with tears in your eyes, you said, "Though he slay me, yet will I trust him." And that made you dangerous, not because you were fearless, but because you feared God more than failure. You became a threat, not because you were loud, but because you were faithful in silence. The enemy underestimated the depth of your foundation. He didn't realize that while he was working against you, God was working in you. Every setback was becoming a setup. Every delay was preparing your spirit for elevation. The same pit the enemy dug, for you became the place where you found your greatest strength. The battle that was meant to break you became the place where heaven confirmed your identity. The enemy thought you would run from God, but instead you ran to him, and in that you exposed the weakness of his entire plan. You showed that even when you're surrounded by darkness, your light can't be dimmed. You proved that even when your world shakes, your faith remains. He thought you'd crumble, but instead you became unshakable, immovable, unbreakable, not because of your own power, but because the one inside you is greater than anything against you. There were moments in your life when you felt completely invisible. You smiled in rooms where you were silently screaming. You gave when you were empty. You encouraged others while you were desperate for someone to notice your own pain, and it seemed like no one did. You went home to silence, cried behind closed doors, and still showed up the next day like nothing happened. You sat in church feeling like a ghost, worshipped with a heavy heart, and served with a weary soul. No one saw the weight you were carrying, but heaven did. God saw the silent tears, the private sacrifices, the obedience you gave when it cost you the most. While people overlooked you, God was recording every moment. Every time you chose to forgive, heaven took note. Every time you resisted the urge to fight back, to defend yourself, to walk away from him, he watched. While others judged you by the surface, God was watching the soil of your heart. And when people turned their backs, he never turned his face. In fact, it was in those hidden moments that your story was being written in heaven's ink. The real victories weren't the ones that others applauded. They were the choices you made in secret, the discipline, the self-control, the surrender. While you were wondering if God was even listening, he was actually the only one fully paying attention. He heard what you didn't say. He saw what you didn't post. He counted the cost of every yes you gave him when it would have been easier to say no. The world praises the loud, the bold, the visible, but God rewards what is done in secret. That's why you couldn't understand why the applause never came, why the support never arrived, why no one celebrated your small wins. It's because your test was private, but your reward will be public. God didn't forget you. He hid you. He hid you so your roots would grow deep before the fruit showed. He hid you so that when you are revealed, you cannot be shaken by praise or destroyed by pressure. People only see the outcome. God saw the becoming. He saw the late nights you stayed up praying. He saw the hours you spent doing the right thing when shortcuts were available. He saw you holding onto integrity when compromise was easier. And even when you questioned your own worth, God said, "That one is mine." You were never alone in the fire. You were never ignored in the wilderness. The silence wasn't absence. It was divine observation. While you thought no one noticed your growth, heaven was preparing your reward, not because you demanded it, but because you proved trustworthy in the unseen. You've been walking faithfully without a crowd, and God says the time is near when the same people who saw you unnoticed will see you favored, not for their approval, but because heaven was watching when no one else was. There were moments when you wondered why your breakthrough was taking so long. You saw others rise while you remained hidden. You watched doors swing open for people who didn't even pray like you do, didn't serve like you serve, didn't carry half the weight you carry, and still their names were called, their platforms grew, their dreams seemed to come to life while yours stayed in waiting. But it wasn't because God forgot you. It wasn't because you were behind or left out. It was because God was protecting the timing of your celebration. He was waiting until you were not just blessed, but ready. He knew that what he had planned for you was too great to be rushed, too heavy to be handled with immature hands, too sacred to be placed in an unhealed heart. So he delayed the celebration, not to hurt you, but to preserve you. Because if he had released it too soon, the weight of the blessing would have crushed you. If he had answered your prayers before you were strengthened, the very thing you asked for might have destroyed your character. So he held it back while he built you up. He let you go through quiet seasons not to punish you, but to prepare you. He let you be misunderstood, overlooked, and underestimated so you'd learn how to stay humble when the spotlight finally came. The silence wasn't rejection, it was refinement, and while you waited, something happened in you that was far more important than what was happening around you. You developed patience, you learned discipline, you grew roots, you discovered the kind of faith that doesn't depend on applause. And now, when the celebration comes, it won't distract you. It will confirm what heaven already knew, that you were ready, ready to carry the weight of what's coming, ready to lead without needing validation, ready to serve without seeking recognition, ready to walk into rooms you once felt too small for, because now you know it's not about your size, it's about his strength. That delay was God's mercy in disguise. Every moment you spent in hiddenness was a moment God was maturing something inside you that success never could. The world celebrates fast, loud, and early, but heaven celebrates when the vessel is ready. And God has seen the secret work you've done, the battles you've fought in silence, the sacrifices no one clapped for. He delayed the spotlight because he wanted to make sure your soul wouldn't be lost in the shine. He wanted to anchor your identity so deeply in him that no praise could inflate you and no criticism could deflate you. That's why the party didn't start when you expected. That's why the door didn't open when you knocked the first time. Not because God said no, but because he was whispering, not yet. And not because you were unworthy, but because he was making you unstoppable. Now, as heaven begins to lift the curtain, it won't just be a moment of favor. It will be a confirmation that the delay wasn't denial. You didn't realize it at the time, but what you just went through wasn't just another trial. It was the final test before your next elevation. God doesn't promote without preparation, and he doesn't release increase without proving the vessel first. That pressure, that confusion, that deep weariness you felt, it wasn't random. It was the final stretch of a divine exam, and it didn't come to destroy you. It came to reveal you. It came to show God, and even more so to show you that you're not who you used to be. What once would have broken you didn't. What once would have made you bitter only drew you closer to the cross. You responded differently this time. You didn't retaliate when falsely accused. You didn't quit when the path grew hard. You didn't turn to old habits for comfort when the loneliness crept in. Instead, you prayed more earnestly. You stood when your legs were shaking. You believed even when the evidence said to give up. That was the test, and God allowed it, not to expose your weakness, but to highlight your growth. Heaven was watching to see if you had the character to carry what's coming. Many want promotion, but few can handle the weight of responsibility that follows it. You showed him that you can. You didn't need a stage to stay faithful. You didn't need recognition to keep serving. You didn't need things to go your way in order to remain grateful. That is maturity. That is readiness, and that is why this test had to happen the way it did. Suddenly, painfully, quietly. It had to be uncomfortable so the old version of you couldn't survive it. It had to be private so no one could take credit for your endurance but God alone. It had to stretch you, press you, and leave you with nothing but faith. Because that's where real power is born. And now, heaven is ready to reward what you endured. Promotion is not just about a new position. It's about a new posture, a new level of authority, a new clarity of vision. And because you passed this test, not just with tears but with trust, not with perfection but with perseverance, you're being positioned for the very thing you've been praying for. It wasn't delayed to hurt you. It was delayed to fit you. You had to grow into the next season, and this test, this painful, exhausting, silent test, was the final check before the shift. While others were watching timelines and comparing milestones, God was watching your heart. And what he saw was a person no longer driven by applause, but by purpose. He saw someone who didn't just want the blessing, but was prepared to steward it. You didn't even realize you were being tested because you weren't performing. You were just living in obedience. And that's exactly why you passed. You endured what others would have escaped. You stayed when others would have left. You trusted when logic said it was over, and heaven has now written a new word over your life, promotion. And now, beloved, hear this with all the weight heaven has placed on it. God said you've passed, not because you were flawless, not because you had all the answers, but because you remained faithful. In the silence, you trusted. In the fire, you didn't run. In the storm, you stood still and believed. You passed not by might, nor by power, but by his Spirit working inside you. And now, the season of testing gives way to a season of revealing. What was hidden will be honored. What was planted in tears will be harvested in joy. The very place of your pain is about to become the platform of his power. You don't owe the world an explanation. You owe God a praise. Because he saw you when no one else did. He shielded you when hell tried to break you, and now he is lifting you, not for popularity, but for purpose. So stand up in your spirit, wipe your eyes. This was not the end. This was the exam, and you passed it. Heaven has already written it in the book. Well done. Now walk boldly, walk humbly, walk ready, because the next chapter isn't coming. It's already begun. Amen.